All set? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vasileios Panagoulias. I'm a principal at the BCG Athens office, focused on energy and industrial goods. At BCG, we actively participate in the fight against the climate change, and we are helping our clients both on their sustainability and transformation journeys, while at the same time we try to do what we can, leveraging the extended network so that we move the world to a more sustainable and greener future. Today, we're here to talk about carbon capture, utilization, and storage, more known as CCUS. Now, what is CCUS? It basically revolves around the capture of carbon dioxide from large emitters, which either have to do with power generation or large industrial facilities. And they mainly use fuel or fossil fuels or biomass or other types of fuel. This technology was introduced in the Paris Agreement, and it has been one of the key topics in the recent COP27, where BCG as well has been the advisory partner for COP27. Now, the CCUS deployment has been quite ascending. It's not there yet. We have about 36 facilities around the world that are currently operating in CCUS, but we are only at 5% of the total CO2 capture that is required by 2030 in order to keep us to the 2 Celsius degree as per the sustainable scenario in the Paris Agreement. Now, this is quite a hot topic, and we are here to talk about it with two very good and experts that we have with us. We have Tassos Vlassopoulos, CEO of HELLENiQ Petroleum Upstream, a subsidiary of the HELLENiQ Energy Group. And we also have Ferrante Benvenuti, a partner in BCG Milan, who is also the BCG topic leader for CCUS in Europe, Middle East, South America, and Africa. Tasso, Ferrante, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And it is an honor to have you here. Now,
Thank you.
Based on the scenarios that we looked at in the Paris Agreement, there is still a 125 gigaton gap that we need to cover in order to get to the business as usual scenario. And that means that the CCUS technology will be crucial in order to breach that gap. So, Ferrante, we have seen a lot of international organizations, a lot of governments that they're actually committing to that target. Almost 90% of them are setting their goals there. Now, where does CCUS come into play, into that equation, and are we there yet?
Thank you, Vasileios. So, let's say CCUS is certainly for industrialized countries, for Western countries, critical for what we call hard-to-abate sectors. These are heavy industries that have little alternatives to abate their CO2. So there are industries such as cement in which you emit CO2 in the process. So the actual industrial process emits CO2, which is calcination. And you have other industries where really you have very limited alternatives to CCS. So I would say that there is a general consensus, and we see countries moving to sanction, to support projects in order to decarbonize those industries in this part of the world, so Europe and North America. Now, when we look at Asia, we know that Asia relies a lot on coal-fired power plants, fossil fuel power generation. Now, if we want to decarbonize those power generation fast enough to meet the net zero target, we do believe that CCS has a part to play, needs to play a part to decarbonize those power plants. In terms of regulation, we are moving. There are quite few incentives that are available for companies that are in the carbon capture part, so industries, and also in the transport and storage part that usually are energy players. In the US, you have the 45Q, for instance, which is tax incentives quite high. In Europe, you have national programs, and in Greece you have the Next Generation EU that is giving funds to a local storage project. But you also have EU funds, and these EU funds are, for example, Innovation Fund, Horizon Europe. So funding is available, is starting to be more available, and that certainly allows that first step into the decarbonization journey. So we need to go from those 35 projects to thousands of projects. In order to do so, public funding is certainly critical in this first stage.
Thank you, Ferrante. Tasso, today we have seen, and we talked about that the CCUS is actually one of the most significant elements in the critical pathways. And we see that international agencies, policies are being created that are moving us towards that path. That being said, there haven't been many implementations, and we haven't seen them really scale up. What do you think are some of the barriers that withhold this development of CCUS, and maybe some ideas on how they can be overcome?
Vasily, thank you very much. Let me talk about the question, which is effectively the constraints, right, of developing fast the CCUS. There are a number of bottlenecks, okay, in the sector, and at this moment, the sector, it resembles to actually a lot of people going to a place. Imagine going to a bar, a discotheque, okay, and nobody wants to dance. Everybody is waiting for everybody else to make the first move. And that's exactly what we have with CCUS. There are so many, it's a system that for it to be operational, everybody has to move in synchronization. Otherwise, things will not really take place. So what are the key constraints, bottlenecks in the sector? First of all, we have the key bottleneck at the European level is the lack of physical storage. There is not enough capacity to actually store, στα ελληνικά, να αποθηκεύσουμε the CO2, okay? So that's number one. Number two, there are different dynamics between Northern Europe, in our opinion, and Southern Europe. In Northern Europe, there is more opportunity for storage because there are mature E&P plays, exploration and production plays in the North Sea. So there are projects that are taking place in the UK, in Norway, in Holland and Denmark. Whereas in Southern Europe, it's only 2 projects, right? One in Ravenna and the other one is in Prinos in Greece. So different kind of dynamics which reflects the development of the E&P business, of the exploration, of the upstream business. The third thing is that, the capture technology, in Greek, η δέσμευση, of the CO2, okay, is not an issue from a technology standpoint. However, it's not commercially viable at this moment, and therefore what we need is to ensure that there is a financial structure to support it. The cost can vary a lot. It can go between very huge range because depending on where you are capturing and where you are storing the CO2. So if you are capturing it in the Med and you are storing it in Northern Europe, the transportation cost will be multiples. So the cost of the CO2 could be, of the whole value chain, could be between 75 and 150 euros per ton. And we can talk in more detail about that if we need to. Usually, people want to see the development of clusters, right? See, scale. On the other hand, sometimes scale may, face a lot of permitting kind of issues if it's something very big. So smaller projects may take off earlier. However, you need clusters to get the economies of scale. So social acceptability is probably and has been an issue, but I'm sure these things could change as we are going through the decarbonization path. In all honesty, there is actually limited risk once the carbon is actually stored in the facility to leak, and that's not really a big issue. Obviously, the regulatory environment is still undefined, and at this moment, we have the EU ETS is much more aligned to actually pipelined CO2 than CO2 which is transported by vessels, and that needs to be addressed, for the future because in places like Greece or in southern Europe, you don't have the infrastructure we have in the North Sea. And obviously, environmental permitting needs to be expedited, like in any major infrastructure project. And the key thing is obviously in between EU and the UK is to ensure that there are, let's say, there is equivalence between the EU ETS and the UK ETS in order to ensure that moving carbon from Europe to the UK gets you the same kind of benefit. I will stop here for the time being, okay? All right, so.
All right, thank you, Tasso. And thank you for posing this several, let's say, constraints that we need in order to get dancing on the CCU dance floor. Ferrante, on that note, CCUs remain critical in the decarbonization pathways, and acceleration is regarded across agencies, policies, players. How can we accelerate the adoption of CCUS, given that we have very, very ambitious targets for 2030 and 2050?
So thank you, Vasilis. And let me just put just two numbers to put in perspective. So by many agencies, including the International Energy Agency, we need around 800 million tons of CO2 to 1 gigaton of CO2 stored or utilized by 2030. That's per year, right? 1 gigaton per year since 2030. And if we look at 2050, we're talking between 5 to 8 gigatons. So if you think about any project that is around between any big industrial emitters can emit between 0.5 to 1 million. You can do the math. It's thousands of projects that need to be there. So we really need to scale up very fast. Tassos said it very well. There are certain elements that need to be in place. I would say that there are three that are key. One, technology. Second, regulation. Third, markets. Okay? So I'll touch briefly upon those three elements. The first one, technology. So certainly right now, without getting into too much details, the carbon capture technology is quite energy intensity. So to capture 1 ton of CO2, you need around 300 kilowatt of electricity and 300 kilowatt of thermal power. So you need a lot of energy to capture that CO2. Energy, we all know right now, costs a lot of money. Energy is quite expensive. So we need the technology in order to really optimize those processes and bring those costs, those operational costs down. Also because that allows also more efficiency in terms of CO2 abatement. So that's one critical part. Technology also needs to go around what Tasso was saying about liquefied CO2, so CO2 shipping. It will be critical in the Mediterranean. There's going to be no other way, especially if you think about how many islands we have, how many coastal clusters we have, and we don't have enough storage. Tasso was saying we have Ravenna, we have Prinos, there might be others that are way behind, but we need CO2 shipping, which means CO2 liquefaction, it means transportation, regasification, exactly as for natural gas. So also there, we need to have scale in order to bring those costs down. Now, that's number one, which is technology. Number two, regulation. So CCS is in the EU taxonomy. So it is part of those levers, those abatement levers that are recognized as positive by the European Union. There are funds available. However, when we talk about infrastructure businesses, such as this one, where you have a pipeline transportation, you have storage, of course this needs to be carefully regulated, because you can imagine that we want every single industry to have the same opportunities. So it's not that, if I'm a cement in the middle of nowhere, I pay 3 times what, someone else pays if it's close to the storage part, because that would create distortion in the market. So There we are a little bit behind because governments have not fully regulated. UK is the most advanced part, has done an interesting strategy about coastal clusters that are specific for those clusters. But again, there are no comprehensive regulation for entire countries. And more importantly, there needs to be a regulation that allows also exchanges of CO2. But of course, if we have very few storage sites, for example, in the Mediterranean, it means that those storage sites will not get CO2 only from the same country, but possibly also from other countries. So that's step number 2, which is regulation. Now, I think that we also need market forces, because yes, there is public funding, but public funding cannot last forever. They need to be competitive. So again, given the audience, I'm being quite Eurocentric. Apologies for that. But in Europe, there will be the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, that will put a tariff on imports that products imported outside the EU that have a CO2 footprint and therefore will be taxed. That could be a start of a market of decarbonized products. This market is fundamental. We need to have companies, players that are willing to pay or that recognize a premium for green steel, green cement, green ammonia, green fertilizers. Otherwise, it's very hard for governments to sustain for a long period of time subsidies in order to make this industry viable. So I would say that these key elements, and it's not just for EU, I think it's for everything. I made the example of EU because of this forum, but these key elements are fundamental for CCS to prosper and to scale up.
So monitoring the technology landscape, the regulatory landscape, and also exploring market opportunities, leveraging the CCUS. Pretty clear. I think we discussed a lot of the challenges and the opportunities in the global and the European landscape. What about Greece, Tasso? And what is HELLENiQ Upstream's view on the CCUS applications? Have there been discussions? Where do we stand on the CCUS topic here?
Yes, well, thank you. Let's talk about Greece now, since we talked about the European challenges and the market, and the industry sector across the continent. The discussion so far in Greece has been centered around the storage. Okay, so we all know that Prinos has been given, the go-ahead to explore its transformation into a storage unit. Okay, so and we are happy to see the storage being developed in Greece. For this to be successful, we need to obviously, as we said earlier on, Ferrante said it, as well. We need to have capture projects as well that they can be operational and viable. And initially, of course, they will need some kind of financial support. We cannot get away from that. That is, the costs are at a level where this support will be needed. Now, depending on which way you can actually structure philosophical arguments here, but depending which way you incline, either you can use the carrot or the stick. The Americans are actually giving direct incentives. The Europeans tend to use, the EU ETS for that. But there are ways of actually getting this support off the ground to ensure that industrial emitters, e.g. refiners, the cement industry, can actually be there at the time that the whole value chain needs to be developed. So let's put the environment, or the Greek environment, to the side, and let's talk a bit more about the HELLENiQ Energy Group here and what we want to do. Obviously, we are one of the key refining companies in the country. We have 3 refineries, and we produce a lot of CO2. Like everybody does in this kind of sector. We have announced, obviously, through from our sustainability report, these potential cutbacks that we want to do. Now we have about, let's say, 4 million tons of emissions per annum, and we are exploring at this stage. We are studying of a potential pilot in one of our processes, in one of our refineries, to actually put a capture plant there and then transport it and store it somewhere else. So like everybody else, we are there. We are performing technical studies to identify the technology and the licensor, okay, which is very important. But at the same time, we are connecting with shippers, the transportation, let's say, environment, as well as with the storage owners in Greece and overseas, in order to be able to see where we can take our future emissions. Hopefully, things will work out, and we will have a successful project going forward. We'll see. But we are not there yet. We are in the exploration phase of the project. Okay?
No, but the music has started playing.
The music is playing. Let's see who's going to dance.
Exactly,
okay?
exactly. No, great to hear that there is traction as well in Greece on this important topic. Because, as we said, it's one of the key mitigation levers for the road to 2050. Thank you both. It was a great discussion with you two on this important topic, and thank you everyone for listening. I hope at least some seeds were planted and someone came out of this discussion a little bit more knowledgeable on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasileios. Thank you.